lead up to our Houston Executive Symposium on April 23rd. So what we're here to do today is we're here to talk about the topic leading through experimentation, building a culture that adapts. And so what a pre-symposium panel is a gathering of leaders who are going to be at the Executive Symposium here to share their thoughts, their insights, and their perspectives on what they found to be effective when it comes to leading through experimentation, building a culture that adapts. And if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, I want to come and attend this executive symposium, or I want to meet these three great leaders, I will post the link on how to RSVP in the comments of this video. But we got three great leaders here with us today. We've got Thomas, we've got JP, we've got Svetlana. Thomas, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Thomas Gilman. My LLC is called Driving Business Growth. And as the name implies, we help businesses go to that next level. What's causing them to not be able to attain it? Is it funding? Is it Wall Street techniques that we can teach them? Is it looking at their cost structure? We can help them with all those and love to do it.
JP, how about you?
Yeah, JP Dumas, CX and Growth Strategies. I am a retention strategist. I help you unlock revenue in your business. We don't just fix churn, we manage the retention process by enabling an outstanding customer experience.
Fantastic. And Svetlana, how about you?
Hi, I'm Svetlana Winters, and I am finance and accounting executive, over 25 years of experience in manufacturing and industrial services.
Fantastic. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder and CEO of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is by putting on these executive symposiums. So let's dive in. Topic is leading through experimentation, building a culture that adapts. So to kick this off, I know there's a lot of talk about AI, but I think we should talk about AI and the human implications from that. Because I think a lot of organizations, I see at least, will do things where they will have a reorg or a reduction in force, and then they'll go to the rest of the team and be like, hey, now that we've done this major shift in how we operate, let's try to innovate with AI and see what efficiencies we can drive. And there's a lot of psychological insecurity when you do something like that, because if you're an employee of that company, you're thinking to yourself like, cool, I just saw you lay off my friends or move them to a different department that they've never worked into before. And now you're saying try to innovate with AI. Although while on top of that, I've significantly increased my workload because we got rid of a bunch of people that now no longer work on my team. And so I have maybe doubled my workload, and I'm told to try to find efficiencies with AI. It can be a really hard message to actually get across. And so as leaders of organizations, I'd love to just kick off with an initial question is, what is a good way to roll out an AI experimentation strategy? How should we go about doing it, especially if like there's a big push for efficiencies and or maybe cost reductions? How do you balance those two out? I guess where do you get started within all those things to really get the positive ideal results we're looking for from this?
I would say one of the first things that you have to start with is your governance process, because when we start at the top of this, we really need to understand what is the impact that it's going to have on people. More importantly, where do we want to land? And then how are we going to measure this throughout the organization? Because I think ultimately efficiency is one outcome, but if we're being honest, growth is really what businesses are measured on. So I think that becomes a quick win in terms of being efficient, but the growth is really where it is. And so in order to achieve that, we really need to think about, A, how do we help our people to become better? So AI as a teammate, so that we can help customers do business with us so that they can spend more money.
Who wants to go next?
Yeah, so AI is an amazing thing. I can see where workers might be worried. It reminds me of when you had car makers and they were implementing technology and the unions were fighting them tooth and nail to try to keep their worker numbers up. And then they became, not so competitive with Japanese car makers. And so, trying to make sure that the people understand why the AI is trying to be implemented is not just because they like laying people off. It's because they want to remain competitive, now and into the future. And I totally agree with JP on the governance part. You don't want folks on their desktop using public available AI, experimentation on, proprietary items within the business. So, let's be sure we understand which version of AI to use, and then, look at what's acceptable to do with AI and what's not. You have a lot of school teachers find out that people are doing AI from soup to nuts, and it's like, yeah, that's one way to do it, but we want to capture all the efficiencies, like you said, and not just give that over to AI, because then we lose control of what's going on within our company.
Svetlana, how about you?
Yes. So for me, I think it's good source for, especially for leaders. When you build something in a company, let's say procedures, regulations, or maybe you start up the company, that is actually help you to make decision faster, or look or something faster, because before, when we didn't have the source, you have to go to have consulting with legal departments, or I don't know, like tax people. I know maybe you eliminate some work for people, as I mentioned, as a company, as I mentioned, but for me personally, it's a really good source. And I don't think it will eliminate position like mine or any other position, because it speed up the company operation.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, if I'm hearing you right, there are three big points here. I think Thomas and Svetlana are very much aligned. So it's, Svetlana, you talk about really creating processes, procedures, regulations, so then you can make faster decisions. And ultimately, I think what you're talking about is like back to the why. What is the purpose of us implementing this AI or technology initiative? And what is it going to do for us as a business? Let's be just very frank and clear about it. Thomas, you went there and you doubled down on that why behind the implementation of AI, and what does it mean? And you brought up a really good point of just this concept of being able to keep up with competitors, because you're right. Like at the end of the day, in a very myopic micro sense, okay, sure, some people might lose their job to AI, and that's a very real possibility or outcome. But at the other end is that everybody loses their job because another competitor has come in who's using AI, has completely blown you out of the water, and now the business can't exist anymore. And so if we look at it in a very myopic case, it's like, sure, maybe a couple roles might be reduced, but as a larger business, we're able to continue moving forward and by and large be able to keep everybody's job. Or we say, hey, everybody keeps their job, but then all of a sudden, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 3 years, move down the line, a competitor comes in and is so much more efficient and so much more cost effective to the end customer, that it creates an environment where that company can't compete any longer.
But I
Yeah.
think there's two things that are important to mention, right? Because when we talk about the efficiency game, that also speaks to the redeployment of resources, meaning that there are certain things that humans just probably shouldn't be working on. So that becomes good news in terms of efficiency, right? We've gotten rid of tasks and processes that probably don't matter, right? Or aren't as essential that humans need to be working on. But then the next level of that is saying efficiency, and I'm going to stress this point, can't be that only metric. It's got to be around effectiveness of what the AI is doing, which is why I rotate towards the growth piece. It is saying that, is this making the process better? Is this enhancing the overall experience? Is this helping us grow? So that effectiveness has to be a question there. Have we made this easier for us to do business? Has this made us more competitive? That is a key effectiveness metric, not just did we just get more efficient within processes that probably don't matter. So I think it's going to be important, or I go back to governance around how are we going to measure if we are using this AI to win?
Mm.
Thomas, are you going to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point that both Svetlana and JP made. And so you can be clear that there's no guarantee that there won't be layoffs, but our whole game plan is to grow the company so that we'll be doing better tasks, more, fun, use that word, fun tasks with the people that we have and more. That our plan is to actually use this to grow the company and hire more rather than, use this to make the jobs go away and grow smaller.
This whole conversation revolves around, in my mind at least, this concept of security versus insecurity. And when I say security versus insecurity, what I mean by that is this concept of how secure am I in my own place in the world? Not just even at work, but in the world, with my family, with my status, potentially as a free agent on the open market, as an employee within this organization. When we feel comfortable on ourselves, we can behave with a secure mindset. We can be open to changes. We can be open to adopting AI. Why? Because it's like an opportunity to learn, to add to our resume, to build our skill set, to become better. And when we're insecure, we resist it. We fight it. We think to ourselves, this could be my last paycheck. I got to make sure that I firmly root myself into this organization, hoard as much information as I possibly can, disseminate zero of it out because I need to be a cog in this machine. And if it can't operate without me, then it can't operate at all. And so I guess let me ask a question around a cultural perspective. How can we build more mentally and psychologically and emotionally secure cultures where people feel more secure in their place in the world?
Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding. If I counted in my 40 years with oil and gas, we had 17 layoffs that I survived, every single one. But wouldn't that make you a little paranoid, about the next initiative? And so many of the initiatives were just ground to a halt by middle managers that felt that way that you just mentioned. And so the upper leadership needs to make sure that there's not a systematic, initiation, then layoff, initiation, then layoff. So it needs to be a culture of initiation and growth, initiation and growth. And if they can establish a track record of that or just talk through what their hope is, then I think the people will feel less anxious about the new thing coming, which is AI this time.
Yeah, I think there's a certain level of pragmatism that you talk about, Thomas, because when you've gone through that many layoffs, I think what it does is your orientation becomes a bias towards action because you have to constantly prove that you're delivering value to the business, which isn't necessarily a bad way to approach your job, right? You're focused on results. But I think as a senior leader, it is also important that how we communicate this, we're never going to get the most out of our people if they're skittish. To your point, they're going to do all these survival, technique sort of things. When we tell them that the reason why we're downsizing or reducing the organization is because of AI becomes the bad guy. But it's, we do lack the transparency to say, oh, well, maybe we hired too many people after the pandemic, but we can't really say that to our investors and our board. So AI becomes a scapegoat. So we have to read between the lines and see what's going on. But I think at the end of the day, it is really about employees and organizations who build the culture that says the only way that we're going to remain competitive is that we maintain that curiosity, that bias towards results, and continuing to try to do things different that raises that bar of innovation, of which AI is one of the tools that can help us get there.
Svetlana, anything to add to that?
Yes, so I see actually for people, it's not very dangerous tool because company still needs to hands-on people, right? And people needs to do manual work anyway. AI cannot completely trade you, and Finance and accounting, it's still finance and accounting. The only what actually can illuminate for the company to spend less money on, as I said, consulting part, right? If you before will go to some consulting services and ask them more question, when AI now can help you get prepared before you go, it save you money. I mean, that I'm looking from my side,
From a finance perspective?
from finance perspective, yes.
Yeah. Thomas, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, it's maybe we were the ones that should be scared as consultants, but if you can add value using AI as a tool to add more value. So basically, you want to be on the positive side of using AI rather than trying to stem the tide of AI is coming. Let's make the most of it rather than try to fight it or downplay it, because it's one of those things where it's imminent. It's kind of on the horizon. And the people are seeing a lot of value of it. So I agree with Svetlana that there might be cost reductions available by using it. But if you're a consultant and you're only saying what AI would say, then yeah, maybe you need to look for other work because you need to add more value than that.
Right.
Well, I have a crazy radical idea. Like, as y'all have been sharing, and we talked about this concept of like security versus insecurity when it comes to implementing AI and just where you are in your place in the world. This might sound radical. I'd be curious to learn your thoughts. This was pretty harebrained, but my thought would be, what if organizations, especially like ones that really knew they had better company culture than any other culture, actively encourage their people to interview for similar roles at different companies? And I say this because what that might do is it might reinforce to that person what their value is on the open market and what roles are out there if, God forbid, this company does make a big transition. But at the same time, give them an idea as to what their marketability is. And so if they learn, like, wow, I can get a job anywhere, or I can get a job at these other companies or organizations, I can feel comfortable innovating and trying new things with AI here. And if, God forbid, we drive efficiency so much that, my role becomes obsolete, I'm not saying it would be, I feel comfortable that I know that I'd be able to land my next job. Like the discomfort, the insecurity, and I don't know, my mind is it comes from the will I be able to land my next role? How long would I be unemployed? Where do I stand if, God forbid, the worst comes to worst? Because it's the unknown thing that we typically will come up with the worst possible scenario if we're not able to have certainty around it. So, anyways, that's a crazy, crazy radical idea. But
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just I figured I'd bring it up. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think in some fields that might work, and in others the culture is just so old school that it would be very hard to implement, at the middle manager level because they don't want to lose their people, before it's time to let them go. So yeah, that's a real interesting one. But there's some fields that are that way almost already. It's kind of very transparent, very in and out, almost like a contractor mentality. But some industries are not like that.
I'm
I
not
don't.
even saying contractor mentality. I'm just saying a mentality that, like, if you've worked at a place for so long,
Mhm.
you start to think to yourself, oh my gosh, can I work anywhere else?
Yeah.
And like the doubt sets in, and then you're like, well, dang, I don't know if I could. I don't know if I'd want to adapt to a next set of norms or cultural preferences or whatever. And then you think to yourself, gosh, this innovation with AI thing doesn't sound very appealing to me because I don't know if I even have the applicability to go into another organization, let alone if I would thrive there. I'm just trying to think, like, how do we ease the insecurity one feels around AI if they think that it could make I don't know, their work obsolete?
If only we had somebody that was an expert at retention, and could get some ideas from him, that would be awesome.
I think there's a couple of things though that work here. I mean, I think if you think about Silicon Valley, I mean that ethos exists. Not only can I walk in and get a job someplace else, I can build this company. So I think you have that on one end of the spectrum, and other end of the spectrum, you have situations where there's been an implicit social contract that if you put in the work, you can work here the rest of your life. And, on the other end of the spectrum, I also think there's some generational things that are happening here, particularly if you look at, some of our early career individuals who have seen that social contract be torn asunder and that they're seeing jobs lasting maybe 18 months, 2 years and whatnot, and so they've developed those nimble sort of skills. So I think there's a mix there, but I do think your question is a good one. If you're in that middle and you're established and you've not gone anywhere, what does AI look like to you? Because it doesn't look the same to everyone. Is it friend or foe?
Mm.
Okay. My opinion, it's that you actually can use and make some test in a company with your employees. Maybe little tests, to see how they adapt to these new innovations. Because now on the market, company trying and wanted to grow fast. Because competitions and new innovations, everything goes so fast. So you probably want to bring to your company this good tool to your employees.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see what you're saying, Svetlana, but I also, JP, I want to come back to this concept because I brought up that radical idea of like actively interviewing for jobs just to
Yep.
know where you're at in the open market. And you mentioned,
Yep.
oh, at Silicon Valley and a lot of these bigger organizations, that's kind of the norm. That's kind of what people do.
Mhm.
And so I guess the question I have is, how do we go about when we talk about building a culture that adapts, how do we ingrain adaptability in the fiber of everybody, not just the C-suite executive team, but anybody, any leader, any individual contributor, anybody within an organization? How do we ingrain adaptability into the fiber? Because I feel like a lot of company cultures are structured in a way where it's like, wait for my boss to say so, and then I go ahead and do it. It's not a lot of ask for forgiveness. It's more ask for permission. And
Mhm.
so, how can we go about? I mean, and maybe in some cultures, that's probably the best way you have to do it. If it's highly regulated, if there's some serious scrutiny around, taking one form of action versus another, and it could lead to potentially some serious negative ramifications. 100% you got to follow chain of command there. But for a lot of other organizations where like speed is critical and the ability to like digest information and be able to react in that given moment, I don't know, my understanding, my thought process might be, how do you go about empowering individuals to adapt to new changes in the marketplace and be able to go forth and make things happen, especially when the C-suite's not around or available?
I'll say this, and I reflect on my time and in leadership back when I had hair and all this other stuff and was full of ideas. But would you talk to leaders across different organizations and different disciplines and whatnot? One of the most endearing traits that they look for in employees is the spirit of curiosity. And I just think AI is an extension of that because once you become curious, you become innovative and you start to think about how your company works, how the world works, all of these different things. And when you think about the individuals who are identified or fast tracked or who receive those different opportunities, it's that spirit of, you know, let's not just let's try this and not break anything, but it's really understanding how the dots are connected. And so as a leader, it's important to cultivate that in your team. Now, the question is, how do you do that? You give people assignments and you stretch them a little bit. Those are the ways that you get people to grow a little bit. Um, but it's also important to illustrate and to have those reward systems in organizations that will drive individuals to be innovative. And that's why I go back to the promotions and the stretch assignments and things like that. Like you've got to give people a carrot or a reason to move in that direction, and they've got to see proof or wins that those things make sense. So said another way, sometimes organizations are a reflection of the things they actually value and reward.
Mhm.
I don't think it's sometimes, I think it's all the time. I think I would say
Well, I
98%
know,
of the time,
but
companies are a reflection of the things that they value and
yeah,
reward.
yeah, but without realizing that we're, and I'm going to go back to Thomas's point, says this is how we remain competitive. And then we turn around and stifle innovation and say, only use these sort of AI tools, only use them in this situation, don't do this. So now it's well, my goodness, I'm going to get my hand slapped. And so you've got to decide, who do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, there's program, in addition to bonuses or, promotions, there's recognition programs you can implement that just kind of reinforce the fact that, hey, here's somebody that did something with AI that was very innovative. You have a write-up of what it was, and then they get recognized. And so that helps with, putting in place real things that happen for those that innovate. But the other thing is, if somebody tries to innovate and it doesn't work out and they get penalized, that makes all that for nothing. It's kind of, you got to be consistent when it works and when it doesn't work.
Absolutely. And I think you can tell a lot more about an organization when those quote unquote crash and burn or teachable moments happen than you can with all the stuff on the wall and our, our SKLs and all these other things that everybody gets rah-rah. No, when the rubber hits the road and things get tight, what do we truly celebrate and recognize?
Mhm.
Are any of y'all watching any of the Oscar movies or nomination movies or anything like that? Any of y'all into that? All right, so one of the Oscar nominated movies is a movie called Begonia, and it's a very strange and bizarre movie. But the reason why I bring it up in this scenario is the main character, I guess I'd call her the antagonist, but it's kind of blurry. She's a protagonist antagonist. You don't know whether you're rooting for her or rooting against her. But she's the CEO of this company, and she wins this award, or she gets this recognition, and she, makes an announcement to everybody. She's like, "Hey, everybody, I want y'all to leave by 4:30 today. It's Friday. We recently got this recognition. I want you to take the day off. Unless you've got other work that you need to do, and then in which case stay as long as you need to make sure that work gets done and, do whatever you need to do to get it done. But if you're sitting here and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I'd love to get off 30 minutes early for the day, you are more than welcome to take off. So anyways, see you everybody. I'm heading out. So the reason why I bring up that story, and Tom's, you're already chuckling about it, is this concept that I think a lot of companies fall into this trap of saying like, oh yeah, let's build this culture of curiosity, and really let's rally around giving rewards for trying new things and everything. After all of your other work gets done, like, sure, make sure no balls are dropped. We're not going to give you any grace to innovate. Like, you're currently working at 60 hours a week. Like, we still expect that 60 hours of work to still get done. But if you got a couple extra hours you want to craft in for some innovation, be my guest. And I chuckle, and so the point I'm getting at, and the hypocrisy I'm pointing out, is that a lot of organizations don't give the grace that is necessary to actually allow their people to be curious and innovate and try new things. They just put it up on a wall and say, hey, it's on our wall, part of our core values.
Well, I think it's new approach. It's coming up already in the companies that it's called MIP, right? Then you actually let people to bring their expertise, not only way doing, technically, but if they have something on mind and great and see some improvement. I'm not talking about leadership roles, any roles. They welcome to do it. But what I would say, they need to understand that if it's failed, the ownership should be taken by executive. In this case, they will come and tell it, whatever they think on the mind.
Yeah, I chuckle at this discussion the way you framed it, because we recognize that some of this is performative and enter into evidence. I talk about like remote work. Prior to 2020, it was gonna just businesses were just gonna implode until we were forced by a global pandemic to rethink the future of work. Companies continue to function, people continue to deliver, a lot of great things happen. It was almost a half a decade before we were able to get people back into the office. But a lot of those arguments about why it wouldn't work fell apart. So some of this stuff gets performative, and we have to kind of recognize that, well, the data and the behaviors might say something else. But I think what's important that you mentioned is that if we can use AI to enable people to do meaningful work that's going to stretch them, that's going to meet their goals and the goals of the organization, and that there are appropriate rewards in place, then people are going to gravitate towards that. I mean, we're old enough to remember when the internet was going to be the death of everything, and it made businesses and companies better. Those that didn't adapt didn't do well. I mean, all of these things. So it's a natural filling out process is going to happen here.
Thomas, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was laughing because that actually happened in real life. It's almost the exact same speech. I'll have to watch that movie just to see how close it was. But yeah, that's the part of leadership that is not so good. We talk about what leaders should do, and it sounds so easy, but with the pressures on them to actually come through and be consistent in those moments, that's what's hard about being a leader. It's so easy to take off 30 minutes, but wow, all these other goals, I can't let them slide, so I got to put in that caveat. And people on the receiving end of that end are just rolling their eyes going, what the heck? So yeah, being a leader, that's why you get the big bucks, is to make sure that your organization understands what's important, and that your culture is um, one that values innovation, or trying to innovate, even if it doesn't turn out successfully.
So I'm gonna just bring this home for a second, because what you talked about in real life, when your leader says take that time off, yet they're on vacation emailing you every hour of the day, it's a mixed message. I have had leaders who have gone out literally texting me on their way to the hospital doing maternity leave. Like you've got these examples where there's a huge disconnect between what we're saying and what's actually happening. So if you're sending messages every day while you're on a 2-week vacation, yeah, I'm not knocking off early 15 minutes. This is like Lucy moving the football. I know what happens next.
That's
Well
funny.
said.
Well, I love it. And it goes, well, first off, I'll say this. Begonia is a bizarre movie. So if you do watch it, or for anybody who's watching this, you do end up watching that movie, recognize it is a very strange and bizarre movie. If you're watching, you're like, oh my God, that was a weird movie. You were warned. It is a bizarre movie. Um, but on the point that we were talking about earlier of secure versus insecure mindsets, we've talked about it from the employee level, but Thomas, you bring up such a great point of from the executive level. Insecure mindsets create scenarios like this, where people have short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. Short-term thinking says, I need to focus on this quarter, because if we don't show profitability this quarter, well, then my board's going to have me on a short leash and this and that and the other. And therefore, I don't have time. We don't have time to innovate for anything for a year from now, or even 2 years from now, heaven forbid, because we've got to focus on this 3-month sprint. And if we're only focused on this 3-month sprint, we become very much not in tune at all with what the next year or the year after that is going to look like. And so what a lot of organizations are structured like is it's saying, hey, we would much rather show some small profit over a 3-month stretch than potentially take some losses but have enormous profits over a year or 2-year long stretch, because a year or 2 years from now we just don't have the patience for.
Yeah.
It's just discipline.
Yeah.
It's really about your orientation at the top. Like, what kind of organization are we going to be? We all know about that big old company out there that delivers packages to your home in 2 minutes or less or whatnot. But they took a very disciplined approach in terms of, well, we're not going to be profitable for a while, right? You need that leadership who's able to tell the business, and structured in such a way where you're going to lower the temperature in the room, not have 50,000, 100,000, million employees running around with the hair on fire because, we don't believe in our plan. Like, if this is our plan, we're going to take a measured approach to it, and we may have some bumps along the way. Now, it's easy to say from right here because we don't have pressure of shareholders and boards and all these other things, but we've seen it work. Like some of these most profitable companies, we've seen it work.
Awesome. Well, Thomas, JP, Svetlana, this was a great pre-symposium panel. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, I want to meet with these three great leaders, come to the Executive Symposium on April 23rd. We're hosting the event over at McLaren. Would love to see you there. I'll post the link and how to RSVP in the comments for this video. But otherwise, Thomas, JP,